Last October, I reviewed every single movie in the Ju-On or The Grudge franchise, which may not sound like a lot, but that's 4 movies plus 3 movies plus another 4 movies. 12 movies? That's 12 movies in total. I'm pretty sure. You might have to check the math on that for me. And this year, we're going to cover a series that some of you might have heard of. You already read the title of the video. We're talking about The Ring. We're talking about The Ring all October. We're going through every single Ring movie, east or west. And we are going to find out which one's the best, which one's the worst, and how creepy Japanese ghosts fit inside small-ass televisions. We got a lot of movies to get through, so let's not waste any time. Before we dive headfirst into the well that is the Japanese Ring series, we should have some context for where this series came from. Ring, or in Japanese, Ringu, which translates to ring, so I mean, look, clearly it's the English word for ring. Do we have to be full-on weeb and call it Ringu just to tell the part from the movie The Ring? Like, the fuck? Ringu started as a novel, and quickly became a series of novels. But these novels weren't so focused on horror, while that was a good part of it. These were more mystery thriller novels that tried to base themselves in some sort of mixture of supernatural and medical science. It's a weird premise, but in the novels, the curse has a lot more strange science-y aspects to it, where there almost isn't even a ghost at all, depending on how you interpret it or whatever. And that element gets dropped and picked up on by many different entries in the franchise. And the first of which is possibly one of the more faithful adaptations of this book, is a TV movie, later released as Ringu Kanzenban. Kanzenban meaning complete edition. This was added to the release later because when Kanzenban was first released, it was the only Japanese Ring movie, let alone Ring movie in general. This is a near zero-budget TV adaptation of Ring that predates all of them. And it's ironic that this is one of the most overlooked entries in the franchise, and it also happens to be one of the most accurate to the original novel. Kanzenban's main character, Asakawa, is a man, which might surprise you if you're more familiar with the American Ring movie. And perhaps more surprising to anyone that is not familiar with the original novel is the choice of gender for Sadako. Because in the original novel, it was revealed that Sadako herself was intersex. And this plot point was completely dropped from many, many future adaptations. However, Kanzenban still has it. But that doesn't mean that it's gone from the entire Ring canon. We will see this plot point pop up in some weird places. But just like in future entries, Asakawa is an investigative reporter whose niece dies mysteriously along with 4 other teenagers. He then begins to uncover the mystery surrounding a strange videotape that kills anyone who watches it after 7 days. And mystery is an important aspect to Kanzenban, because it is more of a mystery investigation movie with scary parts than an outright horror movie. Sure, there are some aspects that are trying to scare you, but honestly, who are we fooling with a 90s TV movie? Still, it works pretty well as a made-for-TV mystery thriller. The tape in this version works as a set of clues for our main characters to work backwards from. Each thing we see on the tape unveils a new clue for Ryuji and Asakawa to investigate, and gives us a new hook for the story. It does try to scare you, but the low-budget special effects don't work as well as the film wants. And it's not always the most entertaining movie either. It's not completely boring. There are some completely boring movies on this. We will get to a completely boring movie, spoiler alert. But there are some parts in Kanzenban that drag. And that's where you can really feel that this was just thrown together on a very small budget. But at least it tries, and there are far worse things in the the Ring franchise with far greater budgets. With the only copy available being a Laserdisc rip that I suspect might be actually a rip from a VHS tape, it looks like shit, but it kind of adds to the authenticity of a movie about a cursed VHS tape. When it looks like your movie is entirely within a VHS tape, it helps. And it covers up some of the bad effects. Even if this was entirely unintentional, it actually kind of adds to the atmosphere. Weirdly enough, there's more nudity in this TV movie than there is in the theatrical version of Ring. There's at least one scene in the very beginning that's pretty gratuitous. I mean, it's still TV, so it's not porn, but stranger than nudity in a TV movie is that it's missing the TV crawl. It's missing Sadako's iconic TV crawl. We see her ghost at the very end, and that's even more than in the original novel, where we don't even see a Sadako spirit. So you can see that from the beginning, the Ring series was starting to evolve to have more of a focus on Sadako. We'll get to that more, don't worry. If you've seen Kanzenban's theatrical successors, then it might be interesting to check out Kanzenban itself, if only for just how different it is. If you haven't seen any Ring movie, I can't really recommend this as one to start with, unless you're like a super hipster. And if you're watching this channel, you might be. As of right now, it's completely on YouTube for free, but with hard subs, so just check it out. I don't know, don't sue me.
邪悪なギタリストは増えるばかり。どうするジャミコ、頑張れジャミコ。
Now this is the Ring we all know. Or at least those of us that watch exclusively Japanese movies know this one. Already the production value is way beyond what Kanzenban had, but that's not to say the effects are always up to snuff. Gonna be honest here, the photo negative effect that they have whenever Sadako kills somebody doesn't do the movie any favors. But that's not why Ring is held in high regard. This movie's true strength lies in atmosphere. Ring builds up a magnificent atmosphere of dread, because the clock is ticking down every second of this movie. As you see the days go by, you realize that there is less and less time for shit to get done. And just when you think that the characters are perfectly safe and have solved everything, that's when Sadako gets you. Ring is more classy than its TV predecessor. Where Kanzenban relied a lot more on shock value for its twists, Ring cleans it up a little bit. There's no incest and rape, and the surprise twist of Sadako's gender is entirely left out. But Ring has its own share of issues. It's a movie built around tricking the audience into thinking that it's ended 10 minutes before it actually is going to. Just goes to show that one of the most memorable moments in the whole Ring franchise happens right after the fake-out ending. And if the movie had ended on that fake-out, I would not be sitting here singing its praises. It builds up to an anti-climax so that it can get to an even better climax. The soundtrack is used sparingly, but it is very effective when it is used, thanks to the talent of Ghost in the Shell composer and Japanophile favorite Kenji Kawai. The choice to make Asakawa into a woman was handed down from the producers, but I actually like the dynamic here a bit more than in Kanzenban. Making the main characters a separated couple gives their relationship a bit more tension than two guys that work together. And the mother-son relationship worked out better than the generic boyfriend-girlfriend relationship in Kanzenban. I do feel like it could have been explored a lot more. Asakawa and Ryuji are oddly traditional for a separated Japanese couple. It almost makes you think that Ryuji just had a psychic panic attack after hearing his wife was pregnant and just up and left for a younger, more attractive student of his. In fact, that's almost exactly what happened. But it's not told outright. It's there for the audience to infer. Oh, and as a side note for the two scenes that she's in, they do a good job implying Ryuji and Mai's relationship rather than just outright telling it to the audience. It will become explicitly stated in the sequels and remake, but here it's only hinted at. This is also where we get the definitive version of Sadako and the Ring curse. In the original novel, Sadako's curse came from a mixture of her dying will and the smallpox that she had, all put into a videotape that was specifically made to kill. As I've mentioned before, it took a much more scientific approach, trying to explain some of the supernatural elements with science. Sort of. Ring is the first incarnation to be purely supernatural, which ironically holds my suspension of disbelief better. It's easier to say the tape was cursed by the ghost of a dead psychic than it is to say that the tape was cursed by psychics with smallpox. And because of these omissions and just the general quality of filmmaking, Ring ended up being the definitive version of the story, and one that all future adaptations and sequels would take inspiration from. But those sequels had a very shaky start. Oh boy. Here we go. Rossen was made at the same time as Ring, with the expectation that they would capitalize on the success of Ring with an immediate sequel. They ended up being completely right about Ring's success, and totally off the fucking mark about Rossen. Even if you've seen Ring, you probably don't know about this sequel, and that's because they don't want you to know about it. They want Rossen thrown down a well and forgotten about. Is that too soon? The production was largely separate between both movies. Rossen even has a different director and writer, but there are a couple cast members from Ring that show up in Rossen, mainly because they're characters that are carried over from the original Ring book into the original book for Rossen. Most notably, Ryuji's former student slash love interest returns as a supporting character. That's because Rossen brings in a completely new protagonist. Mitsuo Ando conducts an autopsy on his best friend slash our former male lead, Ryuji. Then, through a series of very boring events, he eventually watches the cursed tape at the 40-minute mark. And this is my main problem with Rossen. It takes too fucking long to get anywhere, and when it finally goes somewhere, it is the most retarded place it could have possibly gone. It recaps the events of The Ring very slowly, as if the audience was just finding out this for the first time, and I think that comes from the production. With the films being made at the same time, it was clear that Rossen was not on the same page as Ring in many aspects. Because of that, Rossen feels like a completely separate movie that just happens to be a sequel to Ring. Where Ring ditched many of the novel's medical and scientific explanations, Rossen picks them back up, which probably left audiences completely baffled going straight from one to the other. But I think nothing highlights the difference in direction than Sadako herself, because in Ring, Sadako is this slimy corpse brought back to life. The first appearance of Sadako in Rossen is her fully nude making out with Ando. Ando also lacks the personality or relationship that ever made Ryuji and Asakawa relatable. He's got a dead kid, but there's not much making him interesting that isn't told to us. He eventually gets together with Mai, but their dynamic isn't anywhere near as interesting as our previous leads. Mainly because it's just nothing. It's just two people. Mainly because Mai has kind of been regulated to just being a stock love interest character. She has no character in this movie. Not that she had a character in the two scenes that she was in Ring, but she's just nothing in this movie except someone for Ando to put his dick in. Which is made all the more worse by the fact that she has more of a connection to the previous plot than our actual lead does. Like any Ring movie, there's an element of a ticking clock, but Ando watches the tape and literally does nothing about it, waiting until Sadako kills him on the 7th day. The Ring was a race against time, and Rossen is a waste of time. Oh! Now, I have to talk about this, because Rossen has one of the worst twists that any sequel, let alone movie, could have. So here's some spoilers for a movie that's bad and I won't be recommending anyways. Buckle the fuck in, because this is an ending. Mai disappears only to show up later with better hair. Ando then finds out that the real Mai's body has been found dead and pregnant. They had sex earlier, don't worry about that. But the fetus is missing. Lo and behold, the fetus is actually Mai with better hair, but is actually Sadako because Mai's DNA still carried her genetic memory, but now Sadako has a fusion of both Mai and Sadako. And also might be hermaphrodite like the original Sadako was, but that trait was dropped from the original Ring, even though it was in the original novel, which means that it would be in Rossen, which Rossen is adapted from, so it just works, I guess. And this was all possible because Ando boned Mai, who never watched the cursed tape in the first place, but Ando's bone was enough to transmit the Ring virus because the virus is mutating into other forms, like Asakawa's notebook that so vividly describes the events of the cursed tape that it in fact gives people the Ring virus, or the Ring curse. And Ryuji, whose ghost has been appearing this whole movie, is actually helping Sadako the whole time for some reason and is planning on publishing those notes to spread the Ring curse across the entire nation. But it's okay because the reborn Sadako has brought Ando's son back to life! What the fuck fuck was that? And where the fuck was that for the other goddamn hour and a half of this movie? It's no wonder that Rossen was willingly forgotten about by time. And the next movie in the series, the third theatrical Ring movie, would completely ignore Rossen, calling itself Ring 2, or Ringu 2, or Ringu 2Gu, 2Gu 2 Furious, is frustrating because 60% of it is good, and the other 40% is complete garbage. The worst part is that the good stuff is very front-loaded. Much like Rossen, Ring 2 brings back Mai, but this time she isn't stuck as being just a love interest for a boring male lead. Mai takes over as the main character, and that's actually a change that I was happy to see. Like I said earlier, Mai is much more heavily connected to the events of the Ring. Having a sequel go off from her perspective means that you don't need to waste time reintroducing the elements from the Ring like Rossen had to. The original cast is treated with a lot more reverence than it was in Rossen. It's a big event when Mai finds Asakawa again with her son, unlike in Rossen where they are killed off screen. Ring 2 is at times more character focused than Ring was. Mai has to deal with the fact that her teacher and lover is gone while also trying to look for his ex-wife and son. Asakawa is trying to outrun death and has to care for her son, who is only becoming more and more of an empty shell. These are solid character dynamics that are built upon things previously established in Ring. So it generally feels more like a sequel to Ring than Rossen ever did. And early on, it was actually mimicking the atmosphere and suspense of Ring pretty well. But then the movie takes a turn. And it's not a hard left turn, it's more like a gentle curve in the road. You start to see a couple bumps along the way. The male lead that Mai is playing against is completely cardboard, and I hated every second of screen time that he took up, which thankfully wasn't much. But if he's not going to be in the movie for that long, and he's not going to be important, why bother writing him at all? Ring 2 also makes the same mistake as Rossen, just not as poorly. We have psychics hooked up to devices designed to read their mind and output JPEGs. If you're gonna mix science and supernatural, especially in horror, you need to strike an incredibly delicate balance. And Ring 2 finds that balance, and then completely loses it by the end of the movie. Earlier I said that Ring 2 mimicked Ring's atmosphere pretty well, and that's still true. But once the sciencey elements start to become more prevalent, the movie loses any sort of suspense that it was building. And in some worst cases, scenes that should be suspenseful just become boring. How am I supposed to take any of this seriously when the character has this fucking headset on? The movie also ends on a complete anticlimax. Ironically, it's a lot like if The Ring stopped with the fake-out ending. What doesn't help any of this is that the very final scene of the movie is the death of a character who hasn't been relevant for half an hour, if he was ever relevant to begin with. I would have actually preferred Rossen's completely off-the-wall crazy ending, because Ring 2's is kind of a boring one. This is the only aspect in which I would ever prefer Rossen to anything. Ring 2 is not a horrible movie. In fact, I would hesitate to even call it bad. It succeeds very well in some areas, and then shits in the pool just when you need it to be at its strongest. And that's what makes it so frustrating, because there is a great foundation to Ring 2. A much more solid foundation than Rossen had. Ring 2 just wastes it by the end. Now, going strictly by theatrical release, the first movie is just Ring. Okay, makes sense. The second movie is Rossen, which translates to Spiral. Perfectly fine. Now, the third movie is Ring 2, except it's a 2, not a 3. So it should be Ring, Ring 2, Rossen, Ring 3, Ring 2. It makes sense. Then naturally, Ring 4 would come next, and would probably be titled Ring 4 Rossen 2, right? It's the fourth Ring movie, so it can't have another number attached to it. As the name would imply, Ring Zero is the zeroth movie in the Ring movie franchise. As the name would imply, Ring Zero Birthday has 0 birthdays in the movie itself. As the name would imply, Ring Zero: Birthday is a prequel to the events of the Ring franchise. It depicts the life of Sadako Yamamura 30 years before Ring. Now, at this point, Sadako was part of an actors troupe. Is that how you pronounce that? Trope? Now, at this point, Sadako was part of a group of actors, which is actually referenced in previous films, so good work on the continuity there. Sadako quickly becomes the envy of a few group members, while to others she is strangely unnerving and weird. Surprisingly enough, someone is actually attracted to this quiet, reserved, mysterious, dark-haired, pale, submissive, beautiful, horrendous abomination of man and demon. But here's the fucking weird thing about Ring Zero. It might be the best Ring movie since Ring. No, that does not mean that it is better than Ring, which I still think sits at the top. But Ring Zero doesn't rely on making itself like Ring. Instead, going from the opening shot to the ending, Zero is a tragedy. You know exactly where it's going to go, and there is no way to stop it from going there. The entire story is framed around this inevitability, and the characters get visions of Sadako's horrible fate in the first few minutes. So the suspense doesn't come from not knowing what's going to happen, it comes from knowing exactly what's going to happen. This is how a prequel should be made. Zero is definitely trying to do its own thing, so much in fact that I hesitate to even compare it to Ring. There's no 7-day countdown, or even a VHS tape. And naturally, Sadako is spending too much time being bullied to haunt Japanese schoolgirls. Instead, Zero is closer to Carrie than it is to Ring. Just replace the high school setting with a drama club, and there you go. The ultimate goal of Zero was never to scare the audience, it was to make the audience empathize with Sadako before we see her get tossed into the well. And I think it actually did a good job. It actually makes the whole situation surrounding her more tragic. Sadako was just a normal girl whose darker powers were completely out of her control. And considering what happens to her, it makes perfect sense that Sadako would become a vengeful spirit that kills indiscriminately. Her father was just a scared man who got caught up in the situation and became her killer. It's a new take, but it's not so different that it conflicts with any of the Ring movies. Any of the good Ring movies. Go figure, but Ring Zero completely avoids the scientific and medical aspects of Rossen and Ring 2, once more going for the completely supernatural like Ring. I'm beginning to think that these aspects of the original novel just don't carry over well into film. But, like always, I have my issues with it. This time there's not as many. Despite that they're essentially just cannon fodder, I wish we had a bit more development with the actors. The love triangle is fine, but the rest just end up doing and going where the plot wants them to, just so that they can be killed off. And the third act twist is that there are 2 Sadakos, which, if that's confusing to you, it was even more confusing to me. The split happened sometime after her mother died. This is not shown on screen. We basically have a good twin and bad twin situation, except we don't really see the bad twin outside of a ghostly image of her. Because by this time in the plot, where this is all revealed, good and bad Sadako have fused back into one body. Or at least I think that's what happened. Honestly, I would have just left it at one person with a repressed evil side, and that's kind of how the movie tries to play it off too. But that's it for the bad. Ring Zero is a noteworthy entry into the Ring canon. Almost as much as an aberration as Sadako herself, a prequel movie that is the 4th in the Ring franchise turns out to be the best of any of the Ring sequels. And after Zero, Sadako decided it was time to give up her spot in the Japanese film industry and move on to Hollywood. In our next video, we'll be looking at the Ring remakes. So, stick around.